Take it away. Thank you for coming, Georgi. It's great to see you again.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Not clearly.
Yes, for some reason it sounds a bit muffled.
Yeah.
Okay, if I come closer, can you hear me now? Better.
No.
No.
Okay,
Okay, yes, do. It's okay. So our speaker had to go and come back in to ensure that we have better sound. We have other participants joining. So let's give it a couple of minutes just until we get the sound. Georgi's here. We're just waiting to fix some technical issues we had with the sound, and we will be starting shortly.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you perfectly. No comparison to what you sounded before. Thank you. So,
Great.
Antigone, we are all yours.
Well, hello again. It is with great pleasure to be presenting the official representative of Beta Bulgaria, Mr. Georgi Dimitrov, who is a senior lecturer at the University of National and World Economy, where he teaches ESP mainly to students of international relations and economics, as well as politics and, of course, general English. His main research interests are in the field of phonetics, prosody, and intonation. As a beta newsletter editor, his main hope is that he will manage to contribute to the future development of the association. So, Mr. Dimitrov, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the warm words. So I'm going to draw your attention to the place of intonation in EOT. I know that this is a topic that is difficult to address because we know that, for example, if we have to teach, let's say, the past perfect or the past simple, we can easily find a text, a story, and we can address, let's say, all the past tenses there. But say for the sake of argument, we have to teach a specific intonational pattern. That's way more difficult. Plus, we are not native speakers of English, which complicates the picture even more. But I firmly believe that intonation has its place, and we have to be careful and consistent in teaching it. So let me share my screen. Can you see the presentation?
We can see the slides, not yet the presentation.
The presentation.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Now we can.
Great. So We have to admit that teaching is such a phenomenon where we come up with new methods, we replace old ones, and sometimes we revive old ones. It is a kind of a cycle. And we contribute to the cycle, and it keeps repeating over and over again. Sometimes the new methods are better than the old ones, but we have to also admit that new methods do not necessarily equal more effective methods. We have to be honest with ourselves and our students. These are more general remarks. Now, the introductory part of my presentation, let's pay attention to some attitudes towards intonation from well-known sources. No language is spoken on a pure monotone, no matter if it is an intonational language, if it is a tone language, if it is a pitch accent language. We have to admit that any language has intonation in its spoken medium, of course. Now, the second quote is from O'Connor and Arnold. It's a classic. It's basically bedtime reading. English speakers are able to make a good deal of allowance for imperfect sound making, but being for the most part unaware of the far-reaching effects of intonation in their own language, they are much less able to make the same allowance for mistakenly used tunes. And I think this second one is convincing enough that we have to pay attention to intonation and to try to incorporate it in the LT classroom, be it at primary level, secondary level, tertiary level. We have to make the effort to do so. Two more quotes here. Intonation has long been the Cinderella of the linguistic sciences. This is from Sharp, and it is referred usually to in an appendix. For example, if you look at the Quirk and Co-authors Grammar, a book of about 2,000 pages, intonation is, the place of intonation is reduced to the appendix of the book. And the final quote here, intonation is probably the most difficult chapter on phonetics, both for the teacher and the pupil. This comes from Professor Minkov from Sofia University. Now, it's interesting to notice how we react to intonation, right? But we seldom make the effort to consciously pay attention to the intonation that we use when we say something, right? It's easier for us to notice when someone else uses especially inappropriate intonational pattern, but we seldom or perhaps never pay attention to our own intonation. So based on that, we have to ask ourselves, what type of exercises do we need so that we can improve both our intonation and the intonation of our students? And I think that since we rarely pay attention to how we say something, it's better for us to focus on production exercises rather than on perception exercises. Plus, perception exercises are easily available nowadays. You can always open, let's say, YouTube and listen to a native speaker or to something, but it's way more difficult to construct a perception exercise, to, let's say, construct sentences with certain grammatical structure or certain context, let's say a series of sentences where particular intonation patterns are, let's say, not the correct ones, but more appropriate than other intonation patterns or more frequently expected to be used by the learners. So I think that we have a lot of approaches to intonation, both theoretical and practical. We can discuss the British school, the American structuralists, and how they approached intonation. But I think that we can, for the sake of our discussion here, we, as I said, can boil the dilemma down to perception as opposed to production exercises. And as I said, production exercises will be more difficult for us both to construct and also to perform. Because we have, for the most part, seldom paid attention to intonation. Now, here I have a very simplified example that shows what we can use, let's say, as a starting point, and we can introduce terminology based on the level of our students. For example, we have the sentence, the neighbor ate the cake. And in this case, we have a question which indicates the context that is intended. And actually here we have two options: to place the accent on cake as it is indicated here, but we can also place another accent on ate and have the neighbor ate the cake. Both are possible in this case. By possible, I mean contextually appropriate in the context of the question. Because the whole sentence, the neighbor ate the cake, is new information with respect to the question. The question is what happened, and anything that we say in response to the question represents new information in this context. But we can also have narrow focus on a specific element, let's say on a specific word or phrase. For example, narrow focus on the verb. What did the neighbor do? The neighbor ate the cake. Here we focus, let's say, on the verb or the whole extended verb phrase, ate the cake, but the neighbor is not new information in this case. It is all mentioned already in the question, and we don't have to emphasize the neighbor. This is, of course, the most general scenario. If we want to indicate surprise, for example, we can always emphasize, for example, the neighbor ate the cake, but it's up to us and to the situation that we are trying to describe. Basically, we can place emphasis on any word or on any syllable, depending on the situation, but still there are some general rules that we can use as guidance. And yet another possibility here, we can have the focus on the subject. Who ate the cake? The neighbor ate the cake. These sentences, of course, can be represented in a much more complicated manner, again, depending on the level of the students. For example, if you have students of linguistics, let's say, you can use the immediate constituents analysis. You can divide the sentence into subject and predicate. You can also use the X-bar theory from phonetics. Here, W represents weak, S represents strong. And you can have the subject part that is represented by a noun phrase, the neighbor, then the predicate part, ate the cake, which is realized by an extended verb phrase. We have the verb, which is weak relative to cake. And here, the strongest position is the cake, because we have I don't know if you can see the mouse. We have SSS, strong positions on all levels. Now, let me try to relate my discussion to the previous presentations and how we can use the technology, perhaps artificial intelligence, for facilitating the teaching of intonation. Here we have a sentence similar in structure to the neighbor ate the cake. We have the pitch contour here. And we have transcription. The question mark here indicates that the transcriber, in this case, I'm the transcriber doubts if we have emphasis on create. We create business or we create business, and we can indicate our doubts by using a question mark. We can move on to the concluding remarks, and I hope that we'll have enough time for discussion. The technological development, as far as intonation is concerned, I basically associate it with software such as Pratt, such as Audacity. This is software that allows us to record sentences or utterances, to cut them, to combine them, and to analyze them. That is to transcribe them, especially Pratt, which is specifically designed for transcribing intonation. You can manipulate the sound wave. You can, for example, here, you can add other levels of analysis. You can, for example, add a level that is a transcription level, and you can transcribe the utterance if necessary. But the idea is that with the technological development that we all have experienced, especially since the turn of the century, intonation, in my view, deserves fresh attention. And we have seen that this has happened theoretically. For example, during the 2015 Congress, an international prosodic alphabet was proposed so that we have transcription, right, the international phonetic alphabet, but we can also have a transcription for intonation, international prosodic alphabet. This was proposed at the Congress in Glasgow 2015. Whether it will get white currency is debatable, but my point is that intonation has received a lot of theoretical attention based on the technological development that we have all experienced. And I think that the practical side of the issue deserves more attention, and we have to do our best to pay attention to teaching intonation in the AOT classroom, be it ESP, be it, let's say, a secondary school, doesn't matter, because intonation is an indispensable part of language in its spoken medium. I'm not sure if we can use ChatGPT to teach intonation. I have used speech synthesis software, and for example, if I type a sentence and then I press the play button, it seems that it produces an appropriate intonation pattern, but I have never experienced with more complex sentences. But perhaps this will be one of the challenges for ChatGTP to decipher the context intended very, very carefully and to give us a set of appropriate, not correct, I'm avoiding the word correct deliberately, and to give us a set of appropriate intonation patterns. Perhaps this will be one of the challenges for ChatGTP and all speech synthesizers. What do you think about ChatGTP and intonation? We know that if we assign the software the task to produce a text, right, ChatGTP does a great job. But what about prosody, intonation? I don't know.
In fact, it would be interesting if you could give us some further information about how, I mean, practical activities, since from what I can see, you're working with adults. How do you go about introducing the work on intonation to adult audiences in relation to academic or English or ESP? Thank you.
Right, so let's go back to, for example, this sentence here. First of all, of course, the fact that I'm working with adults does not mean that I don't have to be careful. Have to be careful, first of all, because they are not students of linguistics, right? They lack the linguistic background. And secondly, they are students of ESP, that is, their primary focus is, let's say, economics or politics or law. But let's have this sentence, for example, the neighbor ate the cake. And in the unmarked case, and in most cases, we know that in English, it is the last noun that is emphasized. Basically, a general rule. In most cases, I'm not saying all, but in most cases. And if you ask the students, for example, to try to focus on the final word they produce, it will usually be either a noun or a verb, if you think about it. We can rarely find a sentence to end in a preposition in English, especially produced by a foreign learner of the language. And if I try to focus their attention on the final word and to ask them to place emphasis on it, again, I'm deliberately avoiding terms such as speech accent, the nucleus part of the sentence, and I'm sticking to, let's say, a more transparent term such as emphasis. If I ask them to emphasize the final word, what are the theoretical scenarios? When they're focused on the final word here, this means that they will, theoretically at least, increase the tempo with which they will produce the part preceding the final part, that is the final word, which hopefully will also increase the level of their fluency, because in order for them to get to this part, they have to go all the way from the subject to the verb, through the verb, and finally they get to the final part. This is, of course, a very, very simplified model, but we have to be very, very careful and not to rely only on the fact that they listen to music all the time, that they watch movies all the time, because yes, we all do it. and we are exposed to native speaker intonation. But what happens when we open our own mouths and produce a series of sounds? Do we pay attention to intonation? Perhaps not. I bet that we very rarely do so, because perhaps no one has ever taught us to do so. So we have to be very careful and gently direct them as to what I want from them, and pay attention to the results and compare how they performed, let's say, prior to my instructions to focus on the final word. And this is what I would suggest: to be consistent, but to use very, very simple methods, and to compare their earlier performance with, let's say, their performance later on, when they have, let's say, had the chance to apply emphasizing the final word, let's say, for 2 months, 3 months, depending on the time that you have at your disposal.
Thank you so much. That was a very detailed answer. Nare, do you want to ask something? I can see your hand raised.
Yes. After listening to the presentation, two questions just appeared in my mind. So, because quite often I also hear the opinion that, unfortunately, because of the modern approaches to teaching English, prosodic and phonological features have started being excluded from EFL teaching. But on the other hand, I want to refer to the current tendencies in EFL, which is about multilingual classrooms and translanguaging. When you have multiple nationalities in a single classroom, which might, I don't know how much it is in the case of Greece, which sometimes happen in Armenian schools as well. Based on this, the current state, and also whatever many EFL teachers also discuss, I want to ask these two questions. Whose introduction, whose intonation are we going to teach in an EFL classroom? Because the use of English becomes more and more local and contextual. And what about inclusivity, right? Because during the first plenary speech, it was said that, and this is also the reality in Armenian, when, let's say, for the Armenian intonation, for the Armenian pronunciation, students, I remember myself, were not given an opportunity to speak up, because each time we would be interrupted to correct our intonation and pronunciation. So I would be very thankful if you just discuss these two points. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So the first question, which model should we use? I think that we should rely on a model which is well described in the literature. Not because this model is superior than any other models, or accents rather, varieties, but because we can have a clear idea as to what we are teaching, and we can always refer it as, use it as reference, so that we can exercise control over our own teaching and the performance, as well as the performance of our students. Does this answer your question, your first question?
Yeah, I mean, but if the communicative purpose is reached, though with the wrong intonation, what should the teacher's answer be to this situation?
You mean if you're able to say what you want to say, right? Then what is the point of intonation?
And what if the intonation is wrong?
What if the intonation is wrong? Well, if you perhaps do not communicate with the native speaker of the language, then no one will notice and pay attention to it. And perhaps this is a good transition to your second question when we have the multilingual classroom. I suspect, and I have to admit, of course, that if, let's say, I am a non-native speaker of the language and I communicate with another non-native speaker and we use English, I suspect that none of us will pay attention to the intonation of the other. And of course, if you communicate mainly through writing, there is no way that you will review your intonation. It is revealed in the spoken medium only. But still, if you want to improve your language competence on all levels, you have to pay attention to intonation. And I do not interrupt my students when they start talking. I wait patiently till the end, and I even encourage them to speak more, because I can't focus on the intonation without them being willing to speak. Because if they, let's say, open their mouth and say, yes, good, no, I don't want, what's the point of addressing intonation? We have to have longer chunks of language. So first of all, I have to encourage them to speak, to use the vocabulary that they know to use the vocabulary actively, because they know a lot of words, but are these words activated in their minds? Because when you have to write something, it's easier, but speaking is, I think, way more difficult, because you do not have what you have previously said on the paper in front of you, and you have to have a lot of vocabulary, not to know the vocabulary, but to have it activated in your mind so that you can use it effortlessly.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if I managed to answer in a detailed manner to your two questions.
Yeah, I guess I asked the questions because I wanted to understand how to motivate students to pay attention to the importance of intonation, because according to them, communication is what they want. Yes, I guess, yes, for sure, I will use many of your ideas in this process. Thank you very much.
And I have to admit that my first task is to motivate them, to urge them to speak. Because you know that there always comes a point when laziness kicks in. And it's way easier to be in the classroom and to listen to the beautiful voice of the teacher. I'm kidding, of course, I don't have a beautiful voice, than to speak.
So, Vicky, Dr. Papachristou, you have raised your hand, your arm.
Okay. Hi, thank you. On the topic of motivating students, I think that intonation is difficult, yes. It's super segmental, we don't get to see it. We hear it, it's perception. But we should not forget that intonation also in English doesn't make a difference in meaning. It's all about the mood and the feeling, right? So we can actually use a lot of kinesthetic activities, as well as if I can call them emotional activities, to motivate them. and focus on the fact that intonation carries mood and feelings. So we can play with them and we can motivate them, yes, use activities like them. And I have done this actually, and it helps a lot. And it raises their awareness. And next time they speak, they actually tend to think what kind of mood or feeling they want to convey. And that is funny, but also very enlightening. So you might want to give it a shot or consider this for your classes as well. You might find very interesting results, I think. I mean, in terms of motivation and what they want to say, and it will motivate them to speak as well more and express their feelings more. That's all for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
For the suggestions. I've actually been lucky once or twice because I've been able to spark a discussion. And yes, when the emotions are engaged, they are way more expressive and they use intonation, but I mean, they use intonation more distinctly as opposed to when their emotions are less engaged. Yes, this is, let's say, a possible approach. The question is, how many times will you be able to engage their emotions in such a way that they become active enough and immerse themselves in the discussion so that they can practice their intonation.
Well, that's true. Yes. Well, we need to give them time, as always, to get into this. But you know, students may surprise us sometimes. And a good idea would be to play with videos from very famous TV series where they can replicate that and they can change the emotions, they can take up roles. That could help even the shy students, the shyer students, to be more extroverted. You know, as you said, methodology is not, all methods are not always effective, but we can try some ideas. So that could unlock some feelings or some students. And, you know, the more we use them and we practice, sometimes the more the more confident students feel, because it's a matter of confidence from a point onwards. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I have a specific interest in phonetics and intonation myself, so thank you.
Okay, we have exceeded our time, but thank you all for contributing to this discussion and to making the first day of our conference so interesting. I think we have truly embraced TLT in a very practical but also theoretical way. We have reviewed elements related with AI. We have looked into inclusivity, and we've even had time to look into elements of phonology, such as intonation. Tomorrow, there is another full day starting at 11 o'clock. Let me remind everybody, attendees and presenters alike, in many countries, the time changes tonight. Crack of dawn tonight. So please make sure you have the right time. We don't want anything untoward to happen. Thank you very much for joining us today. Warm thanks to all the speakers, associate representatives, to our friends who have joined, our members, and of course, the other board members, Dr. Papachristou, who is our vice chair, Ms. Melidonioti, who is our secretary general, and Ms. Polichru, who is our member. See you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Once again, if
Bye-bye.
attendees
Bye.
want a certificate of attendance, send me an email.